The al-ʿAwāṣim was the Arabic term used to refer to the Muslim side of the frontier zone between the Byzantine Empire and the Umayyad and Abbasid Caliphates in Cilicia, northern Syria and Upper Mesopotamia. It was established in the early 8th century, once the first wave of the Muslim conquests ebbed, and lasted until the mid-10th century, when it was overrun by the Byzantine advance. It comprised the forward marches, comprising a chain of fortified strongholds, known as the al-thughūr, and the rear or inner regions of the frontier zone, which was known as the al-ʿAwāṣim proper. On the Byzantine side, the Muslim marches were mirrored by the institution of the kleisourai districts and the akritai border guards. The term thughūr was also used in the marches of al-Andalus and Mu'awiyah al-Nahi, and survived in historical parlance, to be revived by the Egyptian Mamluks in the 14th century, when the areas traditionally comprising the Awasim and thughūr in northern Syria and the northern Euphrates region came under the control. Arab-Byzantine frontier zone. Creation of the frontier zone. Already from late 630s, after the rapid Muslim conquest of Syria, a wide zone, unclaimed by either Byzantines or Arabs and virtually deserted, emerged between the two powers in Cilicia, along the southern approaches of the Taurus and anti-Taurus mountain ranges, leaving the Anatolian plateau in Byzantine hands. Both Emperor Heraclius and the Caliph Umar pursued a strategy of destruction within this zone, trying to transform it into an effective barrier between the realms. Nevertheless, the ultimate aim of the caliphs remained the outright conquest of Byzantium, as they had done with its provinces in Syria, Egypt and North Africa, and it was only the failure of the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717–718 that forced a revision of the strategic objective. Although raids into Anatolia continued, the goal of conquest was abandoned, and the border between the two powers began to acquire more permanent features. For the next 2 centuries, border fortresses might change hands between Byzantines and Arabs, but the basic outline of the Arab-Byzantine border remained essentially unaltered. Thus the term al-thughūr, which initially meant fishes, clefts, and designated the actual borderlands, came to mean boundaries, employed in phrases like thughūr al-Islam, boundary of Islam, or thughūr al-Rumiyya, boundary of the Romans. This process was marked by a gradual consolidation of the previously deserted zone and its transformation into a settled and fortified borderland, especially after the Byzantines abandoned Cilicia during the reign of Caliph Abd al-Malik. The Muslims began to move into the area, reoccupying and repairing the abandoned towns and forts. The process began under the Umayyads, but intensified under the first Abbasids, especially during the rule of Harun al-Rashid. Thus a line of forts was gradually established, stretching from Tarsus on the Mediterranean coast to Malatia and Kamarcha on the upper course of the Euphrates. These were located at strategic checkpoints, located at the intersections of major roads or at the mouths of important passes. Administrative organization and settlements. The entire frontier zone was initially part of the Jind of Homs. After 680 it formed part of the new Jind of Qanasrin, until Harun al-Rashid established a separate Jind al-ʿAwāṣim in 786, covering the entire region from the Byzantine border in the north and west to the Euphrates in the east, and a line running south of Antioch, Aleppo and Manbij. Manbij and later Antioch were the new province's capitals. The al-ʿAwāṣim proper served as the second defensive line behind the thughūr, stretching across northern Syria and comprising the towns of Bagras, Bayazjuluk, Alexandretta, Siris, Raraban and Tizan. The thughūr, the actual frontier zone, was divided into the Cilician, Assyrian and the Jaziran Mesopotamian sectors, roughly separated dominated by the Amanus Mountains. There was no overall governor or administrative center for the thughūr, although Tarsus and Malatia emerged as the most important towns in Cilicia and the Mesopotamian sector respectively. The towns of the thughūr came variously under the administrative control of the Jinn al-ʿAwāṣim or functioned as separate districts. The situation is complicated by the fact that by the 10th century, the terms thughūr and al-ʿAwāṣim were often used interchangeably in the sources. In addition, from the early 10th century, with the Byzantine advance into Armenia, the frontier around Diyarbakir became a third sector, thughūr al-Bakriya. In the Cilician sector, Mopsuestia was the first city to be reoccupied and garrisoned, already under the Umayyads, who settled 300 soldiers there in 703, a number raised under the first Abbasids to some 4,000. Adna followed in 758 to 760, and Tarsus in 787. Tarsus quickly became the largest settlement in the region and the Arabs' most important base of operations against the Byzantines, counting between 4,000 and 5,000 troops in its garrison. Other important fortresses in Cilicia, which however were little more than military outposts, were Ain Zaba al-Harunia, founded by Harun al-Rashid, Tal-Gaber and al-Kanasat al-Sauda. These were complemented by smaller forts dotted across the Cilician plain, holding smaller garrisons of a dozen of some men. In the more mountainous terrain of the Mesopotamian frontier zone, the main strongholds were located in the fertile parts of relatively isolated valleys, controlling the entrances of passes over the mountains. Marash, rebuilt already under Muawiyah I and again under Harun al-Rashid, al-Adil, likewise refortified by the first Abbasid Caliphs and provided with 4,000 troops, and Malatia, which had been colonized by the Umayyads, destroyed by the Byzantines and rebuilt again and likewise garrisoned with 4,000 men in 757. Further fortresses of lesser importance in the Mesopotamian sector were Salagas, Qasim, Isn Zibatra, Samesat, Isn Kalaudia and Isn Ziyad. Some of the northern fortresses of the al-ʿAwāṣim province, like Cplakidas, were also sometimes included in it. Further north, the relatively isolated fortress towns of Kalakala and Kamacha formed the northernmost outposts of Muslim rule. The thughūr al-Bakriya included, according to Qudama ibn Jafar, Samesat, Ani, Malikiyan, Gamma, Oran and al-Kilis. The caliphs repopulated the area by bringing in colonists and regular soldiers from Syria, but also Persians, Slavs, Arab Christians, and people from the eastern edges of the Muslim world. Settlers from Khorasan, the Turkish Siberia tribe, Jats from India. The regular troops stationed were favored with lower taxes, higher pay and small land grants. In early Abbasid times these troops numbered some 25,000, half of them drawn from Khorasan and the rest from Syria and Upper Mesopotamia. They were complemented by volunteers, drawn by the religious motivation of jihad against the Byzantines, but often paid a salary by the state as well. All this entailed a heavy financial burden on the Abbasid government. Under Harun al-Rashid, taxation from the Cilician sector brought in 100,000 gold dinars every year, which were all spent locally for public works, salaries, espionage, etc. In addition, the costs of cross-border expeditions typically ranged between 200,000 minus 300,000 dinars annually. The Mesopotamian sector's revenue revenue amounted to some 70,000 dinars, to which the central government added 120,000 minus 170,000 dinars each year for the upkeep of the fortifications and the salary of the frontier troops. Military operations. By the 9th century, the Arab raiding expeditions launched against Byzantium from the frontier zone had gradually assumed an almost ritual character and were strictly organized. According to Qudama ibn Jafar, the conventional pattern of Arab incursions included a first expedition in spring, when horses could find abundant fodder, followed after about a month's rest by a summer raid, usually the main campaign of the year, and sometimes by a winter raid in February to March. The importance of these raids is summarized by Islamic scholar Hugh N. Kennedy. The Saifa was as much a part of the symbolic and ritual functions of the caliph as was organizing and providing leadership for the annual Hajj to Mecca. The frontier zone was fiercely contested between the Arabs and the Byzantines. Raids and counter-raids were a permanent fixture of this type of warfare. Forts on either side of the notional frontier were captured and razed, or sometimes occupied, but never for long. As a result, the region was often depopulated, necessitating repeated resettlement. There is nevertheless evidence of some prosperity, based on agriculture and commerce, especially during the second half of the 9th century, when the borderlands became a node in a commercial route linking Basra with northern Syria and even Constantinople. After 842 and for most of the later 9th century, the decline of Abbasid power meant that control over the thughūr gradually devolved to semi-independent border emirates, chiefly Tarsus, Malatya and Cilicia, which were left largely to fend on their own against a resurgent Byzantium. The Battle of Lalakan in 863 broke the power of Malatya, altering the balance of power in the region, and signaled the beginning of a gradual Byzantine encroachment on the Arab borderlands. With the onset of the Abbasid Caliphate's terminal period of crisis after 928, control of the Muslim frontier cities shifted to the Umayyad and Hamdanid dynasties. In the 930s, under the leadership of John Corcoran, the Byzantines broke through and conquered Malatya and most of the Mesopotamian sector of the thughūr. Although the Hamdanid emir of Aleppo, Saif al-Dawla, managed to stem the Byzantine advance, his success was only temporary. In 964–965, Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas captured Cilicia, followed soon after by Antioch, while the Hamdanids of Aleppo became a tributary state. Mamluk Turkmen frontier zone. After the conquest of Syria in the late 13th century, the Egyptian Mamluks re-established the al-thughūr Awasim as a defensive zone to shield Syria from the Turkmen states of Asia Minor and the Caucasus, including at a later stage the Ottoman Empire. Like the earlier model, the thughūr were divided into a Syrian and a Mesopotamian march, as well as a rear zone along northern Syria. The Mamluks entrusted the defense of the Syrian, Cilician march to the client Turkmen Principality of the Romadnids, while the dual Qadirid Principality fulfilled the same role in the Mesopotamian thughūr, to safeguard the control of the frontier zone, and to keep the two client beyliks separated and under control. The Mamluks also retained garrisons in 7 strategically important sites: Tarsus, Ayas, Serfendika, Sispdar, Malatya and Divriji. Ahmad al-Kalkashandi gives the subdivisions of the Mamluk thughūr as follows: 8 for the Syrian sector and 3 on the Euphrates sector.